start us off is not someone who's not only an expert on water, but also a very entertaining expert on water. That's why he's your kickoff, Grady Gammage Jr. And in looking for your bio, it was interesting, Grady. Lots of different things are said about you in various places. So I appreciate Sarah Porter for kind of helping me bring this together. But one in particular I like is that he's a part-time academic, a practicing lawyer, an author, a sometimes real estate developer, and a former elected official. He thinks life is more interesting if you do lots of different things. And you'll see that in his presentation today. It definitely comes across. In his academic role, Mr. Gammage is a senior fellow at the ASU Morrison Institute. His work there focuses on urban growth and development, quality of life, and local economic issues. He also teaches at the College of Law and at the Morrison Institute for Design and the Arts. As a lawyer, he has represented real estate projects ranging from master planned communities to sprawling subdivisions to high-rise buildings and intense urban mixed-use development. He served on the CAP Central Arizona Project Board of Director for 12 years and was president during the period of turbulence when the CAP was suing the federal government over the cost of the canals. As a real estate developer, he built an intense urban mixed-use project in the city of Tempe, which has won 3 architectural awards and has been widely acclaimed. Mr. Gammage is the author of the book Phoenix in Perspective and numerous articles on land use and growth issues. He is also the co-author of Watering the Corridor, Managing Choices in Arizona's Megapolitan Area, a report published by the Morrison Institute for Public Policy. He's also a very proud member of Valley Leadership Institute, Class 3. Grady?
Class 4. I think I'm much younger than you let me believe. It's fun to kick this off today for all of you, but I want to start with a disclaimer that people think I'm a water lawyer. I'm not. People think I'm a water expert. I'm not. I'm a water dilettante. As the intro would lead you to believe, I'm essentially a broad and shallow person. And I'm perfectly happy with that. My purported expertise in water came only because I was elected to the CAP board and was on there for 12 years. Now, the way I got elected to the CAP board is that I was recruited by the city of Phoenix to run because they felt there was a need for some more urban perspective. And I did absolutely nothing to campaign. But because I had the same name as a big pink building in Tempe, I got like 240,000 votes the first time I ran. I didn't make a single speech, I didn't cut a single ribbon, I did nothing. This is essentially how we often make public policy in Arizona. You get to ballot box and, after voting for state mine inspector, you come across the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, and you're like, I don't know what this is, but there's a name I recognize, I'll vote for it. So I got on the CAP board, and I expected when I got on the CAP board that I would see a lot of the same people that I had spent at that point 25 years dealing with in city council meetings about urban growth issues. That was not the case. Water policy tends to be made in a much more closed environment much of the time than does urban growth policy or land use policy. We've tended to divorce the decision-making about water from the decision-making about land. And there's a number of reasons for this. Part of the reason is that water has been the province of engineers. Engineers view a crisis as a reason to build some new piece of infrastructure. Land use policy tends to be the province of planners. Planners tend to view a crisis or problem as a reason for a new regulation. And these are fundamentally different worldviews that often collide. Part of the reason for the difference between water policy and land use policy is sort of an inherited legacy of the Bureau of Reclamation, which has treated water as something to be moved and managed in a very governmental command and control type system, rather than in a rollicking free market environment, the way we tend to deal with land. So I give you that personal background so that you understand you must hold my level of expertise only to that which you expect of a politician, not of an actual expert in the field. And since this is Arizona, I know that standard is achievable. I want to, before I go to some slides and talk about things, I want to give you some very big picture backgrounds. My role today is to set the stage and give you kind of big picture about water in Arizona. There's a wonderful passage in Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi, where Twain talks about becoming a riverboat pilot, and how, as he was working on the Mississippi on the riverboats, he would train under great riverboat pilots, and they would learn to teach him how to read the eddies of the river so you could tell where the sandbars are. They would explain to him the currents and where the channel was deep and where you were likely to be able to navigate more freely. And this level of expertise of looking at the minutiae of the river was wonderful and valuable. But that at the end, you quit looking at the river. You were looking at pieces. You were looking at the small components. And you forgot to notice that the river was beautiful and a major feature of the landscape of America. That happens to us with water a lot. That we tend to focus on individual decisions, on the minute problems of the day, the things that we'll be talking about the rest of the day. And we forget to remember kind of the big picture of how water makes it possible for us to live in a place beyond the 100th meridian, where it rains less than 10 inches a year, and how it is the thing that defines us as a people. So I want to give you sort of some general thoughts about water to start off. 3 different observations about water as a commodity. The first is that if you think about human life, there are kind of 4 fundamental things that make human life possible: water, air, land, and sunshine. Yeah, you got those 4, you can kind of work it out. You can kind of make everything else work. Well, of those 4 things, only one is readily portable: water. You can't move sunshine very easily. You can't move dirt, but not really land. That portability is the story of Arizona. That portability is the story of the arid West. The portability of water, which, you know, if you go back and you read John Wesley Powell, he wanted the West to organize very differently around watersheds, and for us not to move water and create such gigantic hydraulic experiments. But that's not what happened. We sort of followed in the footsteps of the Hohokam and realized that you would be better off in the West if you concentrate civilization at points where you can collect water. Portability is the essential nature of water compared to the other commodities. The second observation is that economists talk about public use goods and private use goods. Public use goods are things that are just there for the taking. They're not things that we think of ourselves as owning and transacting. Sunshine and air, of those 4 commodities in our system, are public use goods. Land in our system, the Anglo-American jurisprudential system, is kind of the ultimate private way. Now, that's not the case everywhere. There are societies built around the notion that land is a commons or an ejido, and that it is not owned by individuals. But that ain't the way we do it. Well, we view land as being an individual private use good that can be owned. Even when the government has land, we think of the government as the owner who can manage it and deal with it. Water is the only one of those commodities that sometimes we deal with one way and sometimes the other. Sometimes we think of it as more of a public use good. It's when it flows in a stream and it's available for the taking, and it's kind of a first in time, first in right, and as long as you put it back when it leaves your property in the same place and in the same volume that it was before, you can do with it whatever you want in between, but it still belongs to everyone. It's part of the river. It's part of the water rights of an area. When it's underneath our land, we kind of try to think of groundwater more as a private use good. You can pump it up, you can put it in a bottle, you can sell it, you can deal with it. Much of the complexity of Arizona's water law and of the water laws of the West is about this distinction. Is it public? Is it private? Which is it when? How does it transition between the two? That's part of why water is so complicated. The difference between a public use good and a private use good is often found in the nature of sharing. Sharing the resource when we have it, or sharing the shortage when we don't. That's a lot of the conversation you're going to be hearing today is about the nature of sharing, which brings me to the third observation about water as a commodity. Water is the ultimate tribal commodity. People with whom we share water are us. People with whom we are worried they are going to take our water are them. In our case, the tribe we're going to be mostly talking about today is Arizona. Now, there's subsets within that, but Arizona is our tribe. That's where we decide how to share water. That's what's been going on over the course of the past several months in conversation. Them is mostly California when we get right into it. They are our principal enemy with regard to all of this. And the last thing I want to say before I actually use the slides is to talk a little bit about Arizona's place in the West with regard to water. We've had a chip on our shoulder about water for a very long time. Since the division of the river in the Colorado River Compact, we've been pissed off, frankly. California got 4.4 million acre feet out of the river when it was divided up in the early 1920s. We got 2.8 million acre feet. We thought we got screwed. We thought we should get the same amount of water that California got. That's why we didn't ratify the compact for such a long time. Now the reason, we had some pretty good arguments. You know, the river flows through Arizona for 300 miles before it forms a common border with California. And we contribute to the Colorado River. The Salt, the Grady, which form the Gila, it's a tributary, the Bill Williams, the Little Colorado. You know, water from Arizona flows into the Colorado. California's not like that. There are no tributaries to the Colorado River flowing out of California. There's a little bit of sheet flow, but not much else. So we thought we should get the same amount. That seemed pretty logical to us. California's argument, on the other hand, was, please, we're California. You have arguments, we have congressmen. We've been using it for a long time. You know, we're big, they're little. We lost that argument. The result of it was the last time one state brandished arms against another in the history of the United States. It was over Arizona and California and sharing of the Colorado River. But we've still felt disadvantaged. You're going to hear a lot later today about the Groundwater Management Act and the early days of the CAP, and once again, having taken a lesser number, by the way, Sarah will probably, if she gets a chance, tell you about our lesser number worked out fine for us because we kept the Gila out of our 2.8 million. That's worth 1 million acre feet or so right there. So we came out all right. We were actually pretty cagey about the way this all worked out. But when it came time for us to try to get the CAP bill, we felt like we got kind of shoved again by being told that the CAP would have to be a junior priority in the group. And that didn't seem exactly fair. So we feel a little disadvantaged and insecure about our place in the West. The second thing about Arizona in the West is that Arizona has had the fortunate circumstance of, generally speaking, growing crops and people in the same place. We are in this different than Colorado or California. California, they grow people on the coast, they grow crops in the Central Valley. Colorado, it's one side of the Rockies or the other. We have tended to urbanize areas where we previously grew crops. That has been a secret of our great success in water management. It's kind of fortuitous geography as much as anything. I did a case down south of Tucson for a major residential master plan community about 5 years ago. That ultimately, this is in the town of Samarita, ultimately will have 50 or 60,000 people. Currently, that land is occupied by 115,000 pecan trees. When it is urbanized, the water use will go down by 60%. That's resulted in what has been historically an alliance between municipal and agricultural users. Maybe breaking down a little bit these days in Pinal County and also on the river. The third thing I want you to think about is that the history of Arizona's water decisions is a history of multiple decision makers. I was at a thing, Paul, that we were at a while back, where we talked about the book, The Lords of Yesterday, about how water decisions tend to be made based on rules that were written 50 years ago or 60 years ago. and they move very slowly. There is a tendency when you hear about the complexity of Arizona water issues to think we should more centralize decision making. That wouldn't this be simpler if we had some one entity deciding all these things? We haven't done it that way. We have DWR, we have CAP, we have SRP, we have the cities, we have various multiple decision makers. I would caution against changing that. I think we've been well served by that, by the multiplicity of decision makers. It may not be the most efficient way to decide things, but if you read James Surowiecki's Wisdom of Crowds, it will remind you that multiple decision makers are less likely to make a big mistake because it has to be vetted so many times and decided in increments. Okay, so those are my general observations. Now, let me go to some slides. Yes, I'm supposed to point it back there. And I'm pointing it. Yes, this is. Okay, go to the next slide. All right. It looks like this is not going to work very well. So I want to talk for a minute just about sort of the, you're going to have to keep going. I'll just keep telling you that I want to show you some of the perceptions of crisis that are out there. A lot of what we need to deal with in Arizona is the fact that much of the United States thinks we are kind of a weird demographic mistake. That this many people should never have lived in a place this hot and dry. This is, I think, kind of an East Coast Eurocentric worldview, that the natural nature of the human condition is to live where it is cold and clammy and it rains a lot. You know, I'm sorry, I like sunshine. I like living in the desert, and remember my early point, water is portable. But nevertheless, we see, keep going, we see a lot of national press. This is particularly in the New York Times, which kind of obsesses over water and Arizona's water problems. Yes, demand could outpace existence. Now, these are not necessarily wrong. They're just a bit on the hyperbolic side, and they seem to presuppose our own incompetence in sort of dealing with the problem. Okay, more of these, and we'll pause on this one for a minute because we're going to be talking about this a lot today throughout the day. We have done this in some measure to ourselves by turning the elevation of Lake Mead into the single barometric factor by which we measure our water health. Now, there's some logic to that, and it's easy to communicate to the public the reality of the level of Lake Mead as something they can see and perceive and understand, but it simplifies the situation considerably. Keep going. So then I wanted to shift to sort of local perceptions. It's not just the people outside of Arizona see a crisis. We see it here as well. Keep going. Death spiral is a phrase I'm not particularly fond of. Now, part of the issue here is that when you name your principal city after a bird that periodically immolates itself in search of rebirth, you communicate a fragility of civilization that clearly invites scrutiny. And so it is easy to see this and assume, next slide, that it is likely, like the Hohokam, we will disappear at some point into the future. Now, we have some real advantages over the Hohokam. We did build this place on their civilization. We did, in large measure, rebuild their canals in bigger and better fashion. But the principal difference is that we have storage they did not have, and that's what we're going to be talking about again a lot today. Okay, so where does this water come from? This is the big picture stuff that I just want to leave you with. This is the state as a whole. You can see both the Colorado River, the other surface water includes, of course, SRP, but some other sources as well. If you go to the next one, which is Phoenix, we then replace, we replace, somehow the blue got lost. The blue is CAP water. So in the first slide, it says Colorado River. That means all Colorado River water, including what's used on the river and what's used in central Arizona. So it's 2.8 million acre feet that we're entitled to in general. We can move about 1.5 million. If you really ramp up and push as much through the canal as possible, you can get a little above 1.5 million in terms of getting water to central Arizona. And here, instead of saying other surface water, we say salt and Verde, because that's the Salt River Project. That is the other principal water supply for Phoenix. The next one is just a slide showing the surface water of Arizona and the watersheds. And then let's go to the Colorado River slide. Okay, so here's the Colorado River slide. Upper basin, lower basin is the point at which the river was divided by the Colorado River Compact, with 7.5 million acre feet going to the upper basin and 7.5 million acre feet going to the lower basin. For those of you who are not into water speak, acre feet is about what 2 families in Phoenix use in a year, and that number is going down in terms of consumption pretty dramatically, which I will show you some slides. But so you can think of an acre foot as supporting 5 to 6, maybe 7 people in an urban population. The dividing line is inside Arizona. So we have a little bit of water in the upper basin and most of our water in the lower basin. Of the 7.5 million in the lower basin, it is then split 4.4 to California, 2.8 us, and 300,000 to Nevada. Nevada, if somebody really wants to argue about getting screwed, Nevada probably got screwed. But the reason is there was nobody in Nevada in 1922 when the river was divided up. It was like, you know, sort of a meaningless place. This was before quickie divorces and gambling made it, you know, a big attractor. This shows the CAP Canal coming from the river through Phoenix and on to Tucson. You're going to be hearing from people from the CAP later today, both Sharon, who is up next, and Ted Cook, who's the general manager of the CAP. Let's show the SRP slide for a minute. Okay, well, there's the CAP, and there's the Salt River Project. I'm constantly amazed. Now, all of you in this audience, I hope, already have an understanding of the difference between SRP and CAP. But I'm amazed how many people in Arizona do not. That they just know there are canals and that somebody must run the canals, and they don't know the history. Let's remember for a moment that when we look at these canals, we tend to think of the West as this place where rugged individualists can eke out a hard-scrabble living, you know, based on a horse or maybe a pickup truck, a four-wheel drive pickup truck, and some guns, and you know, a patch of land in the desert surrounded by barbed wire or concertina wire, and that we can all, you know, we came here in fleeing civilization. Of course, the reality is utterly different than that. You can't survive in an arid place like Arizona unless you get along with your neighbor well enough to dig a ditch or share a plumbing system. It is the digging of these ditches and the building of these plumbing systems that is the defining characteristic of civilization here. It's our equivalent of a New England barn raising. The oldest governmental units in North America are the acequia districts of northern New Mexico, where ditches were dug, and the Mayordomo owns the ditch. Well, we realized that as we built our civilization where the Hohokam in and dug ditches in W.J. Murphy, the bridle path, you know, the digging of the Grand Canal, are early examples of that. But pretty early on, we figured out, yeah, we couldn't really do it on our own. We needed some help from a larger collective entity, the federal government. And so SRP, as one of the earliest major reclamation projects in the United States, is the first example of the federal government sort of bailing us out with regard to law, building us something. We paid them back for it, but the canals are still the property, the SRP canals are still the property of the United States, not of Arizona, not of SRP. They made it possible. CAP was a later example of that, a massive federal project to make it possible for us to live here. We resent the federal government, but We are the children of what they did for us in building these projects. Go to the next one. This is a report that we wrote at the Morrison Institute back in 2011. We are intending to redo this over the course of the next year because it's old, it's out of date. But it was an effort to look at the water supplies for central Arizona and reach some kind of conclusion about the carrying capacity of the Sunport, the area, the Phoenix-Tucson urban agglomeration in central Arizona. How many people could really live there? I will show you a conclusion of this report in a few minutes. When we redo it, we'll probably reach a different conclusion. The inputs are not as robust as we probably thought they were in 2011. So go to the next one. This is from that report, and I use this just to illustrate a point that the central challenge, water challenge of living here, is not just that it is dry, but that our water inputs are highly variable. The next slide shows you that just in the context of the Salt River Project. The bars are inputs, inflow into the SRP system. The line is deliveries by the SRP system. What we've done, what makes this place possible, what makes it work, is we've taken a highly variable supply and figured out how to smooth it out. That's what storage is about. That's why we have reservoirs, both the SRP reservoirs and the big reservoirs, Meade and Powell on the Colorado River. Those are not lakes, they're reservoirs. They're storage mechanisms to smooth out a highly variable supply, both the Colorado River supply, which is primarily snowmelt in the Rockies, and the Central Arizona supply, which used to be primarily snowmelt on the Mogollon Rim and the White Mountains. Less snow is occurring in those areas. This function is what makes us different than the Hohokam. It's also what makes us different than a lot of other places in America. This is something that is largely misunderstood when you read those perceptions of crisis in the New York Times, or even in the LA Times. We can live with a dramatic decline in rainfall from year to year because we've done this, because we can smooth things out. I tell people, particularly people from outside Arizona, when they come here and they want to learn about Arizona's water situation, I tell them about 6 years ago now, Atlanta was down to 28 days of water in storage. It's all they had for metropolitan Atlanta, which metro area is a little bit bigger than Phoenix. Atlanta itself is smaller than Mesa, but there's a lot of other people living near there. 28 days worth of it, because it rains a lot. When it doesn't rain, they're like shocked. Well, we know that it often doesn't rain at all. So we tend to keep in storage somewhere between 5 and 10 years worth of water for the Sunport. Between the reservoirs and underground storage, which we've done more aggressively than anywhere else in the United States, even the world, frankly. We tend to have 5 to 10 years worth of water in storage if you cut off all inputs to the system. Now, that isn't how it happens. All inputs don't go dry at once. So it's actually more than that. Is that enough? We'll come back to that question. This was in the 2011 report, my summary of water supplies for the Sunport. I sort of reached the conclusion then, I'm saying I because I'm willing to take the responsibility for having said this. I really wanted a more robust dialogue about whether or not these numbers were right, and I could never get anyone to engage on doing that. I sort of came to the conclusion then, well, on average we could assume that for the Sunport, this is Maricopa, Pinal, Pima, a little bit of Yavapai, Santa Cruz counties. This is the 2.8 million acre foot assumption was what I made. And that assumption was actually then something I tested against what were our climate change assumptions at the time, which resulted in my cutting this down to more like 2.5 million acre feet. I would cut that more than that today, without any question. I think the climate change numbers we were using in 2010, 2011 were, by today's measurements, overly optimistic. Okay, next slide. Where does the water go? Okay, first, next slide. State of Arizona, 70% of the water is still largely going to agriculture. This is the other thing that is misperceived by people outside of Arizona. Now, that number is declining all the time as we urbanize. It's going to decline more precipitously by virtue of the decisions that have been made in the last couple of weeks about Pinal County agriculture and what's going to happen. Part of what we've done in Arizona that is also unknown to most people is that way back in the early 2000s, when the CAP Canal was declared complete, there was this formula by which farmers were supposed to be charged for water. It turned out to be really expensive. There were a whole ton of bad assumptions made. Assumptions about the price of cotton, assumptions made about what it was going to cost to build the canal. The federal government built a canal and it ran over budget, big shock. Well, when you applied the formulas, the farmers couldn't afford the water. So we cut a deal at the time that frankly is different than what happens in California. That deal was farmers had to surrender their long-term water rights in order to get the right to buy water below the cost of bringing it here, subsidized by the cities. Now the reason we did that in the early 2000s was to keep the water away from California and to get it here where we could bank it and use it or use it for growing crops. But it meant that when the shortages came, the farmers wouldn't have long-term water rights. They'd need to surrender that water so that it could be used for municipal use. California, the farmers still had long-term water rights. It would be very difficult for them to ever fix that. This is only with regard to CAP to fix that. SRP is a little different, but it doesn't much matter because SRP is going to be fully urbanized. Groundwater is different. Let's go to the next one. This is the difference in the counties. You still see here the very heavy agricultural use in Pinal County. That's been the source of the contention about could we get DCP Plus done or not. That, I guess, got resolved yesterday. Sharon's going to explain that to us. Let's look at Phoenix AMA demand for a minute. Even in the Phoenix AMA, which is essentially Maricopa County, a third of the water is still going to agriculture. This is ultimately the big challenge we face as our water supply declines, is what happens to agriculture and do we move all of that water to urban uses. Talk a little bit about the change in demand. The next slide is out of date. I hate to show a slide that ends in 2008, but it would show a continuing trend. I meant yesterday to try to update this and I just didn't get it done. But this is the per capita consumption in the AMAs, the active management areas. It's gone down pretty dramatically. And this has happened not through draconian regulation, but through a combination of education, pricing signals, and other kinds of things. The next slide is the favorite slide of all people in the water business in Arizona. It shows that our water use peaked in about 1980, just as the Groundwater Management Act was passed. And that, in fact, our water use today is pretty close to where it was in 1957, despite bar charts showing the more than tenfold increase in adjusted state income, gross income, or state product. And the other line chart at the bottom showing population increase. We've done this through a variety of ways, reducing per capita consumption, but also retiring agriculture is one of the biggest factors in this. The next slide shows the decrease in groundwater withdrawals in the 3 active management areas since the passage of the Groundwater Management Act. And the next slide shows the number of acres planted in the counties and the change over time. And the slide after that is just a Phoenix slide. This is a City of Phoenix slide showing the decline in per capita use. This is not total water use. It wouldn't look such a dramatic crossing of lines. But per capita water use going down as population has dramatically increased. The next slide I'm going to show you is the one, Sarah, where I didn't put your multicolored ones in. Sarah has these wonderful slides she gave me that show a given Phoenix neighborhood and how much grass has disappeared in that neighborhood. through colors. I am unfortunately pretty badly colorblind. And every time I show these slides, I'm totally lost. I finally gave up on the slides. In fact, I decided I can't do this. Bars work for me, multicolors. This is the proportion of single-family homes in Phoenix, city of Phoenix. This is the city of Phoenix statistics source, that have a majority of their landscape in grass. It is dramatic. Sarah's slides make the point about an existing neighborhood. If you look at new neighborhoods compared to existing neighborhoods, it's even more dramatic. There is just not much grass being planted. Now this is, for the most part, a good thing. Trees mitigate the heat island better than grass does and use a lot less water. We built Phoenix on the notion of transforming it into like Columbus, Ohio. Let's make it look like it's the Midwest, and then we'll get people from the Midwest to move here. And it worked. It worked really well. We Ubered lots of people from the Midwest into moving here. But it is not a good long-term way to live in the desert, and we're learning that. Having said that, Phoenix and Tucson are fundamentally different places, I think. Tucson is a desert city. Phoenix is an oasis city in the desert, because Phoenix is a farming town. It was built on farming. And I don't want us to lose all of that remnant of our heritage in places where we had flood irrigation, where we made this look very different. The next slide is a lot about the Groundwater Management Act. Go to the next one, which you're going to see a wonderful movie on. The producer and director are here of the movie, and you get to see it. I've seen it 3 times. I'm going to cut out, Kathy. I have to escape it. It's a great movie about the Groundwater Management Act, which is still an extraordinary legislative accomplishment. The next slide is about our water banking. This is a really amazing thing that we do in Arizona that people don't realize. Not so much of it going on now because the supplies have decreased, but in order to get water away from California and to have it available for future use in Arizona, we use a canal. This is one of the Western water is full of these amazing ironies, but here's an irony, all right? The CAP canal is fully concrete lined, so we don't lose water to seepage. And yet, over the period of the last 15 years, we have used that canal to move water 300 miles uphill into the middle of Arizona so that we could dump it onto the desert and let it seep back into the ground. When I was on the CAP board, and when I was president of the board, I dedicated one of the recharge sites. And dedicating a recharge site to turn a head gate and flow the water out into the desert. And I remember my talk saying, what would Carl Hayden think? All those years he fought to get the canal, that we're now using it to dump water onto the desert and watch it seep in the ground. My conclusion was Carl Hayden would have thought it was pretty cool. He would have thought it was a far-sighted solution. But I'm doing this, I turn the head gate, and the water flows out into the desert, and there's a guy standing next to me, and he says, isn't this the most exciting thing you've ever seen? And I looked at him and I said, you must be a hydrologist. This is the most exciting thing you've ever seen. It's a weird existence you have. You know, watching water seep slowly into the desert. I told that story 20 years ago, right after we did it. I told that story in Texas. This woman in the audience runs up to me afterwards, Mr. Gammage, that story about recharge is just unbelievable. Can I go to Arizona and visit a recharge site? I said, were you listening to my story? Just water seeping into the desert. Yeah, I want to go. So the CAP set up a visit, and this lady and her husband came out, and they went out to Granite Reef, to the recharge site out there. They folded out their lawn chairs, they sat, and they watched water seep into the desert. They ate sandwiches. We're just happy as can be. All right, let's talk about the challenges that are coming up and what the biggest challenges are. First one let's talk about is water for growth. Next slide. So this is the Sunport, the metropolitan area. And the growth of the Sun Corridor is the driving economic force of Arizona. Is there enough water to sustain this? Well, partly that is a question of this, the next slide, which is the CHERD replenishment obligation. The CHERD is a wonderful sort of Arizona water shell game created by the legislature and operated by the Central Arizona Project to allow development to occur where the Groundwater Management Act would not have allowed it to occur by buying water and putting it underground, not necessarily where the development occurred, but somewhere where we think we can get it back and use it in the future. I voted for this when I was on the CP board. I have a picture in my office standing behind Governor Simonton when he signed the bill to do this. I thought it was a good idea. It turned out to be wildly more popular than we ever thought it was going to be. We thought it was to allow some retirement communities out in the desert, some Sun Lakesy, Sun City kinds of things. Turned out all the cities in the southern Arizona thought it was kind of a cool idea too, and it's become sort of a go-to solution for development that is not in a city with a CAP water supply. It's been somewhat oversubscribed, and there's some risk behind it. The next slide I want to show you is sort of the population projections of the Sunport. Now you will remember that these are projections in acre feet of water needs by sector. You will remember that I told you in 2011 we concluded the Sun Corridor had about a 2.8 million acre foot sustainable water supply. And that if I had my druthers, I'd review that and cut that number. And what you see circled here today is a municipal demand in excess of that number. It's close. It's not far off. But in order to get close to that, it means agriculture goes away completely. That's a risk. To completely convert our water supply from the Sun Corridor away from agriculture to municipal turns us into Los Angeles, where there is no buffer, where they consume all the water they're entitled to for urban use. In times of shortage, that can be a problem. You can't take water away from people in their houses the way you can hopefully convince farmers to surrender water in times of need for higher value demand. The next thing is the slide I did in Watering the Sun Corridor, which was taking the lesser water supply. And the water supply I cut for climate change as low as 1.8 million and as high as 2.2 million from 2.8 million. And then at different per capita consumption, how many people can it support? So you'll hear people say from time to time, there's enough water in the Sun Corridor for 10 or 11 million people. Well, yeah, there are scenarios which can say that there is enough water for 10 or 11. There's no agriculture at that point. There's not much of a safety valve. You better hope you've got a lot in storage. The next slide. The next challenge is sort of groundwater supplies and what's happening with groundwater. This is a little bit out of date, but you will remember, I know Speaker Bowers in the front row remembers well some of the fights over water supply. The active management areas are not most of rural Arizona, and they haven't wanted that kind of protection until they realized that the water was largely getting pumped up and used for other kinds of things, as is noted here. So we have significant concern in rural Arizona about groundwater issues. This was when groundwater restrictions in parts of rural Arizona were loosened by the legislature. The governor vetoed those bills a couple of years ago. Next thing is one of the things that the Kyle Center has worked on a lot, which is water rights uncertainty. Go to the next slide. We are still litigating water rights in major portions of Arizona. Now, as a lawyer, this is one of the reasons I'm sorry I'm not a water lawyer and that I'm a land use lawyer. You know, I try to get a developer zone, it takes me maybe 6 months. That's really short. In California, it takes like 5 years. That's one of the reasons Arizona is booming to the extent that we can get entitlements in 6 months. Water rights cases, these cases have been litigated for 50 years. This is like a lawyer's dream. That they're going to be suing and be in court and litigating something for 50 years. One of these days it will get resolved. Next is what we talked about a few minutes ago, the Colorado River, and next slide, the challenge of the bathtub ring, of what's happening at Lake Mead as a proxy for the crisis that is created by Colorado River water rights. There are a bunch of things feeding into this. The next slide shows you the structural deficit in Lake Mead. Now this is even before climate change. There isn't enough water flowing. We made a bad assumption. We made an assumption that the river flows on average 17.5 million acre feet a year. It doesn't. It's not even close. Even pre-climate change, its average annual flow was probably more like 10 or 11 to 12 million acre feet a year, not 17. It got divided up after an extraordinarily wet period. And so it's just wrong. It's just, we've just been operating on the wrong assumption. Layered on top of the wrong assumption, we now have climate change coming at us rapidly. So the Colorado River system is in trouble. It is a problem. The next slide will show you over the last few years what has been propping up Lake Mead to the extent it has been. And it's largely Arizona that has been a contributor to this. Now, remember that we had to accept being the junior right holder. We're actually revisiting that to a degree. And that's what the drought conservation plan is largely about. Is about the question of, is it really fair to make Arizona take all the shortage impact? So this next slide, which you're going to hear more about today, shows you what would have been the priority cuts from the Colorado River Compact and what the DCP would do. And what you'll see is that M&I and Indian priorities went down in order to not wipe out so much of Arizona's use. Okay, so the last thing I want to leave you with is these questions. This is really the underlying question you have to ask about water in Arizona, is what is it we want to do with the water we have? Now, there may be some ways we can augment water supply, but it's risky to make the assumption that cloud seeding is suddenly going to produce a whole lot more water, or that something else magic is going to happen. The real question is, if we got this water, what are we going to do with it? And here are some of the competing uses. First, you got to ask yourself, what are we going to leave any of it in the environment? Are we going to leave any of natural Arizona the way it once was, or are we going to de-water the whole place? Let us hope that is not what happens. The problem is, just left to pricing mechanisms, that may be what happens. The next slide is agriculture. The single biggest question about the future of water in Arizona is, does agriculture survive? I think it should, but I think we ought to have a more robust dialogue about what that means. Do we use it for recreation? The golf course issue is probably going to take care of itself because people just aren't playing golf anymore. The real dilemma of golf courses is how do you transition to other uses when people live around them. The dilemma of all of these things about water is that we make assumptions about priority and about use, and then people rely on it. And that reliance becomes a legal right. And then how do you fix it as things change? That's the central dilemma. Do we use it, next slide, for economic development purposes? Things like the Tempe Town Lake. Anytime I do one of these talks, I have somebody want to stand up and say, we need to drain the Tempe Town Lake. I will defend this all day long. This is a good use of water in the desert. It is creating a punctuation mark in the urban fabric that results in economic development. Next slide is about landscaping. I show this slide occasionally and I say this is Phoenix on the upper left and Tucson on the lower right. Neither slide is exactly accurate, but it is a proxy for the difference in the way we live, both density-wise and landscape-wise. The next slide is about the densities at which we live. So both multifamily projects. The one in the upper is a much higher density project, but it also uses a lot of water. I don't know the per capita difference in water consumption between these two. And then the last one is sort of back to, next slide, the urban fabric. Now this water was not artificially put there. This is an SOP canal. And it is a realization that those canals can be urban amenities. So let me go to the last slide. This is the thing I'm going to leave you with. This is how I want you to think about this as you listen today. You will all want to ask, do we have enough water? When are we going to run out of water? Well, that's exactly like me saying to you, Kevin, do you have enough money? When are you going to run out of money? It's the same kind of question. It's all about what assumptions you want. How do you want to live? Do you want to leave any money for your kids? Do you want to use up all the money you inherited from your parents? How risk averse are you? Do you want to live entirely off of cash flow? If you lose your job tomorrow, do you want to take money out of savings to make up for it, or are you going to cut back and not live the way you've been living? What kind of investments do you want to make? It's all the same about water, the same kinds of questions. How much do you want to leave of groundwater? That's ancient inherited groundwater from past generations. Do you want to leave it for future generations? Do you want to use some of it now in order to carry us over? That's what's going to happen in Pinal County. The farmers in Pinal County are going to have to go back on the pump as their CAP supplies are withdrawn. They have the right to do that. That's how we set up the system. Is it a good idea? Of course not. But that's the deal. That's how it works. So the difference is, when I ask you about money, you're responding on behalf of your family. When I ask you about water, you're responding on behalf of your tribe, your collective group. And so the last slide I'm going to show you is Roosevelt Dam. You are today just about 100 feet away from a series of pieces of Roosevelt Dam that were removed and put here to remind us of the heritage that makes this place possible. We wouldn't be here but for Roosevelt Dam, the other dams that created the Sunport project, the big dams over Colorado, the enormous investment made by the federal government and generations of farmers and citizens in Arizona. That's what makes it possible for us to live in this place. But all of that only happened because we trusted collective action. We trusted government enough to do these things for us. Could we get a dam like Roosevelt Dam built today with dysfunctional politics? You know, I really wonder. I wonder about that question. The sustainability of this place is not about climate. It's not about geography. It's about politics. It's about understanding that collective action is what's necessary to make it possible to live beyond the 100th meridian. Thank you.